Welcome back, everyone, to this episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast. We call this podcast the Law of Relevancy because we talk about things that are happening right now. I'm Cord Zoen. I'm your host. I'm the president and CEO of Bake More Pies, a full-service agency here in Tampa, Florida. And today I'm joined by James Gregson. He is the digital creative director for Lego's internal agency. And James has quite a lot of experience with the topics that we've been covering here on the podcast, especially as it relates to being relevant and social media. James, welcome to the Law of Relevancy podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So I think one of the first things that we would like to talk about, James, is really there are other block products out there. And it seems like, I think Legos are now close to 100 years old. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
And Legos haven't always been at been on fire. They haven't been really super relevant. They've had their ups and downs. What is it that is lately going on with Lego? It seems like Lego is leading almost the world in how they're using their creative product and partnering with some of these brands out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very kind of you to say. That we've certainly, come out of like a wildly successful year, which feels sort of humbling and strange coming out of, what was a crazy year for all the reasons I think we know about. I think there's a number of reasons if you look at the immediate, you look at 2020, right? You look at things like puzzles, right? I think the stat I read the other day was the leading puzzle manufacturer, right? Increase their sales of something like upwards of 400%, right? For all the reasons that we understand. People were desperate for ways to keep busy when, lockdowns and being stuck at home was, the new normal. We had all this, a lot of people term it as free time. I didn't have any free time because I've got 3 kids, but there was time. You had a lot more time on your hands that needed to be filled. There's only so much Netflix and only so much Minecraft and video games and digital experiences that I think certainly as parents and even as adults one can handle. So a product like Lego is very nicely suited to sort of fill that time in a unique and different way, in the same way puzzles are.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with that. My son, I love watching him play with Legos because you can almost watch your kids' minds work on how they're solving problems. Things that it's really, really tangible and how that goes on. What I love about it is he'll get a new Lego toy. He follows the instructions and builds it. And then the next thing that happens is all of those pieces, after it lives on his shelf, like your shelf behind you for a little while, and it's intended form, is it goes in the bin and then it gets mixed up and then it comes back to life of as these unbelievable imagination creations that he has.
He is an ideal Lego consumer then in our eyes, right? I think I am not in that standpoint in terms of I think we have a wide variety of products that serve a wide variety of different audiences and age groups, but we have a really strong belief that the core product is this thing here, right? It is that singular Lego brick that can be built up in hundreds of different types of combinations. And while a consumer can buy the box, the set, because that's what they want, that's only half of the experience, and that is what we want. We want that experience to live on in perpetuity in different forms, to be combined with different sets in different ways, because creativity, imagination should be endless.
And I think one of the things I've been so impressed about what you're doing at Lego is it seems like a lot of these creations are showing up as user-generated content online in the social channels.
Yeah. User-generated content is a big component of, of our overall content strategy. I mean, look on Instagram for all the obvious reasons, right? Instagram being a visual first platform more so than any other social channel. we lean into a lot of our fans' creations there to celebrate them, right? And it works for both parties, right? We're featuring them and giving them the awareness that they want as a creator, and we are getting access to amazing, beautiful content. I will say, obviously, we are very lucky given the medium that is, the Lego brick, that we have fans that do some of the craziest, most amazing things out there, sometimes more amazing than we could even consider.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to see how it shows up in all these different art forms too.
Yep.
It seems like a product perfectly suited for stop motion video. There's people almost like these engineering types who are coming up with these brand new ways to put the bricks together and incorporating other things like springs and rubber bands and, uh, you know, God knows what, right? But it's incredible what you can make with Legos when you can kind of visualize how they can all be put together.
Yeah, I would, on that topic, my favorite thing to look at is what are coined GBCs, great ball contraptions. Those are, mainly Technic built contraptions. There's no other way to explain it, and they are amazing. Great social content as well, because it's sort of mesmerizing in what people create and how they create it, but very, very technical, very, very sort of physics-based and engineer-based. It's amazing.
There was one, I believe, one of your most recent posts on social media featured one. It was the
Yep.
world's largest, correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah. Again, and that's not something that we created, right? That's why, our fans are so amazing what they can dream up, and we are very lucky, and sort of, I am very lucky to be able to have access to that sort of content, right? I very regularly have conversations with other individuals and other very popular, very well-known brands, but they don't have sort of the catalog of user-generated content to pull from, and that is, nothing more, nothing necessarily about the strategy or, how we set things up. That is down to the core of that brick and the core of what the brick is made to do.
That's really great. A lot of other marketers watch this podcast. They love to hear the thoughts of our guests and how they pull together their strategy, how they actually execute their strategy, right? Is there anything you could share with us about how, in your meetings, when you're working with your teams, when you're getting their input and putting all this together, where you're sort of working on how do you corral some of that natural organic content? Is there any kind of steering you can do of the content? Like, how do you engage with it? How do you plan? Like, tell us what goes on in your marketing meetings.
Yeah. I might not tell you what goes on in my marketing meeting for a number of reasons, but also because, to be very honest, Lego is a highly matrixed organization, with, a lot of steering and a lot of bringing people along in a journey to make something happen. But for, people that don't work at, a global brand like Lego, but people that certainly touch the digital space, when we talk about content, I always use the litmus test of, and it may not be for me, right? But across my team, would you as an individual want to share this piece of content on your personal social feed, right? That to me is sort of at least the litmus test for coolness, and coolness ranges from different personalities to different age groups, et cetera, et cetera. But, assuming you have a fairly diverse team, ask yourself, is that something that I would want to share on my social page, on my personal profile, right? Because that is, in a lot of cases, the gold standard for a brand is shares, if we're looking at KPIs. And, if I'm a fairly run-of-the-mill brand, my content and my content strategy might not be about that. It might be way more focused on less engaging business objectives and other external factors that are making you create this content and share that post.
Yeah. And so how do you delegate that?
Yes. I think it's not necessarily something that maybe gets communicated overtly to our marketing stakeholders or our internal stakeholders. I think it's a litmus test, but amongst our creative teams, so that we are constantly pushing the creative envelope and the creative barriers rather than just doing what we are told to by a stakeholder because that's what they want us to do. It's up to my team and any creative team to sort of to bridge that gap to ensure that you're responding to the brief or responding to the ask, while creating something of value, creating something that someone would want to engage with, creating something that someone would want to share. Because if you're not, then you're just you're just answering a very basic question and not sort of moving the needle.
So, James, one of the things that we notice is you really have two different types of content out there on your social channels. And one of the things I noticed about it is that some of it looks to be very produced by your team. Obviously, you were leading the studio at one time, and you don't have to give us the secret sauce of how you do what you do, but we'd love to know as other marketers, how do you, at a high level, pull a concept through to some kind of a reality and it manifestation in, for example, in the post where you did the soundscapes, where the white noise from Legos.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is a great question. I think, before joining Lego, I always thought, when I got the opportunity to interview, I was like, I can't wait. $1 million budgets, it's going to be great, right? I'll be able to create the most polished, most beautiful things ever. That's not the reality, right? Yes, obviously we have, significantly higher budgets for global projects and than other brands that I've ever worked with. But I'm working on a project for something that has a very large audience that does not have a huge production budget. It's got a very large media budget, but the production budget is small, very small, under hundreds of thousands of dollars, like under $100,000. And the opportunity there is, from a production standpoint, being creative, right? So I can't speak to the details of how that Lego Botanical set sort of creative campaign came to fruition, because that came out of our APAC agency. But there is, certainly the audio expression of that would have not cost a huge amount of money to produce. Obviously, it was a very high quality output from an audio standpoint. And I'm sure there's a lot of audio mixing that went into it to get it to that level. But that's a fairly sort of unproduced, not high production sort of quality or expensive creative output, right? So I think it's about being creative with the type of content that we put out there, right? We have access, as I talked about, we have access to a library of user generated content. We have an access to creators out there that love to be featured and love to be the talent in our content. So how can we lean on them to help develop great content? We have awesome designers internally and master model builders internally that are seen as experts in this space. How can we bring them into the fold and create content that feels high quality, that serves the purpose? And then the last thing I'll say is that we have people on staff, we have video editors on staff, so that we can turn this content around quickly, and that we know that the look and feel is going to be consistent and in line with what we want from a brand like us.
Well, that is it. That is interesting. It seems like from your approach, and I don't know if this is your personal approach or a corporate approach, but it seems like the Lego brand and the Lego social media profiles really emphasize quality over quantity of posts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the hardest thing that we struggle with. Absolutely the hardest thing that we struggle with, right? I think anyone that's ever worked in social media would understand how that is a fundamental principle to community management, right? It is always about quality over quantity. TikTok may be challenging that to some extent, I believe, although I'm sure the algorithm is changing constantly. Right, but that also applies to, you know, our editorial calendar, right? We've got hundreds of stakeholders that want a piece of that organic pie, right? But we need to be very strict from an editorial standpoint about what takes priority over something else, right? And that isn't always the most obvious thing, right? It may be that, you know, we see, you know, a reactive opportunity like the post that we just shared today about, you know, Daft Punk and the separation of that band. I love them, so I'm very sad about that. You know, may take prioritization over, you know, a fourth or fifth post for an upcoming, for a campaign that's gone live a couple weeks ago. Right, and that's just a sort of the conversation that we need to have internally about that. You know, it is much more about quality over quantity. You know, and we've even seen in some cases that you know, poor quality content can have a damaging effect on, you know, your algorithm and where you show up in the feed, depending on the channel, right? And that's certainly the case with a channel like YouTube, where watch time is such a critical component. If you're pushing out content at a high volume that isn't being consumed at a high level, it's going to have a greater effect on your profile as a whole.
Yeah, it's just noise at that point.
Correct.
Like,
yep.
please ignore me.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And we've
That's
all
awesome.
seen that, right? We've all experienced that on an individual basis, whether it's an influencer or a YouTuber that you follow, right? The moment they start putting out content that maybe is overly branded or not something you agree with, right? You can ignore it one time, but after several times, you're going to stop, you know, stop subscribing. Same with a TV show. You've got to keep up the quality. It's, you know, any content creator, producer, director, whatever it is, will understand that.
So you just mentioned one thing that I thought was very relevant is the reactionary content. So obviously there's brands out there like Wendy's and Oreos that are that famous for some of their reactionary tweets and comments on social media.
Yeah.
Where have sparks for some of those posts been born within your organization?
God, everywhere. And that is the principle behind it, right? It's got to come from everywhere.
It's great advice.
You know, it can come, and it could and should come from everywhere in the organization, right? We have individuals that are identified as being responsible for it. But that doesn't mean, like a lot of, you know, creative ideas, you know, that those who are responsible for a given task or work stream aren't always responsible for the idea or the origination of the idea, right? So it comes from all areas of the business. We have wildly creative people that work in customer service. We have wildly creative people that work in, you know, Lego brand retail, right? It comes from all over. So we really do encourage those opportunities to come into us. We have, you know, a shared, you know, sort of location for where those opportunities come in. And then we have sort of a very small 4-person, 5, 6, 4-person committee that decides on yes, no, maybe on those sort of opportunities. But again, it goes back to that previous principle we talked about of quality over quantity, right?
Absolutely. And as you've got this awesome responsibility. I mean, I kind of think about your job like that movie from, I think it was 1988, where Tom Hanks, the movie Big.
Yep.
Like, do you have that poster somewhere in your office? Because that's what your job has become.
I do love that movie. That is a phenomenal movie. No, I don't quite have that poster in there. I would say in the background, right? The 8-year-old version of me doesn't quite appreciate the job that I have, because I will agree that at the end of the day, it is still a job. But yes, I'm very much looking forward to when my children are of age where hopefully, and watch them, they won't, but hopefully they play, you know, with all of my Lego sets for days on end.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I want to come back to that in just a minute, but before we do, you know, you mentioned KPIs and the analytics. Obviously, you're one of the people responsible for managing this global brand. I mean, you are the most interfaceable portion of the entire brand with the two-way communication on social media. What are those KPIs that that you like to keep an eye on to help you understand the details and then the macro elements of like whether if you're moving in the right direction?
Yeah. I sort of alluded to this to earlier, right? I think, social media within Lego has gone through a really significant journey in the last 2-3 years. And, we've been through several sort of restructurings to sort of make sure that we can really, really scale beyond where we were. And by that, I mean, we've sort of moved various, before it was a sort of standalone department, and everything was managed within that department. Now we sort of split it up into various pieces, right? So creative is within the creative agency, strategy is within the creative agency, community management and, customer engagement is with our customer service team. Media and, regional marketing sits within our regional marketing teams. Influencer sits within our regional marketing teams, and all those sort of decisions were made with a lot of sense. I know it sounds ridiculous, but they were made a lot of sense in terms of, influencers traditionally supported by media dollars. Media dollars are allocated at a regional level. So, customer service, handles all of the customer service engagement. So why wouldn't they handle community management? So there is a number of sort of teams that bring together, that inform what I hope is always great creative work.
Sure.
So I will say it's not necessary response. It's not on my end of the responsibility spectrum to know about the results and those sort of things. But for me, I always look back at, as I said, sort of that shareable metric.
Okay.
And I'm not looking at necessarily from if a post reaches 1,000 shares or 10,000 shares, that's success. I think what I do speak to often is never walk into a meeting and say that post performed really well, right? Never say this video's got 3 million views. That's awesome, right? Because that without context means absolutely nothing.
Yeah, let's
Right?
talk.
I mean,
Tell us a little bit more about that. That's very
yeah,
interesting because I think we all do that.
we do all do that, correct? We do all do that, and people still do that, and I hear that, regularly. Context is key, right? What does that mean? What does that number mean in context to the rest of the content we pushed out? In context to maybe another similar post, and I think there are adequate challenges, right? One social media post for Star Wars, for example, is not the same as a social media post for Lego architecture, right? That's just the nature of what it is. So then, it may not be, equatable to compare those two posts. But maybe we compare that post's performance to another architecture post's performance so that you get a more apples to apples comparison, right? It's always about the contextual comparison to those other posts.
Well, you did mention that you're highly matrixed.
Yes.
So maybe that's a tip.
Yes, that is absolutely a tip. I can't fix an organization that is 20,000 plus people, though.
Yeah.
That is how the cookie has crumbled, so to speak. So I think, as I said, I just make sure that my team is aware of performance in a context of other performing pieces of content, because performance in isolation of an individual video means nothing because there are so many variables that could inform that.
Well, that's great advice. I mean, one of the things that we really like here at our agency is we love helping our clients with net promoter score implementations to help them understand like how their brand is doing or performing, their services are performing. And really that whole entire program is built around, would you recommend?
Yes.
And in many ways, a share is the same thing.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. No, that totally makes sense. I mean, I think for me being someone that has, a really strong background in social, I'm so used to, and I encourage everyone in the creative space that at least touches digital to let that data and that performance data inform your creative decision making. right? It's so common that we sit in a room being like, oh, well, I think this will be the best piece of creative, or, oh, I think this will be the best messaging. Guess what? You can go in with $10 if you want and throw it on, a Facebook and Instagram, and you'll know with that $10 spend, what has performed better, with a simple A/B test. And I think, I think we all talk about A/B testing. I'm a little resident. I'm not sure how many people actually live into it to inform true creative decision making. They may do it from a where they're informing where they're going to put their media, but how much of that really informs, creative direction, I'm not sure.
That's one of the topics that's come up in a lot of my conversations over the last couple of months with some of the people I've been speaking with. Um, there's almost like this two different creative point of views. It's sometimes it's the creator and they're saying, well, I believe that this is relevant and this is important. And then I've heard some very successful people that I've spoken to say, well, you should find out what your audience is looking for and then have your creative people actually figure out how to get that done.
Yes. I think in the creative world, right, you always hear the term trust your gut, right? I think in the creative world, certainly the digital creative world, there isn't a worse phrase out there. Because unless you, that gut, if you will, are the audience that you're trying to serve, and in most cases it's not, it doesn't matter what your gut thinks, right? As you said, it's what your audience thinks. And that is, I agree with you, the like critical component to this. And that's why I say, I am, even as a creative director, I am obsessed with the data, because the data will tell me whether my gut is right or wrong, and the data will inform how we should be doing things moving forward.
Yeah, that's really great advice for everybody. I want to shift gears a little bit. Years and years ago, one of the things that I really love to do, obviously you love building Legos and creating. I love to fish, and I was hired on to help build out an e-commerce strategy for a fishing industry business, and they were selling lures and rods and things like that. And it only took about a month for that to become a job and to really kind of pull away from my love for that hobby.
Yeah.
Before it became, how do you balance that? I know it's more of a personal question, but how do you balance your love for creating with Legos and whatnot in the job portion of it? Does it ever detract?
I mean, someone did tell me, a mentor of mine did tell me one time, never work for a brand that you love as a product, because you might not love it after that. That's not fair. I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I mean, listen, I will say that building myself as an individual, if I have 3 sets to the side of my desk that I have not opened, that I would like to open, that I desperately want to get into. And I think the act of physically building a set, which is very encouraged at work. When we used to have offices and we used to go into the office, every meeting room has a bowl of bricks, that what could be in a meeting context annoying sound of rattling bricks and people fiddling is wildly encouraged in meetings. It is not discouraged. But it's that point being, it's a physical experience. You have to physically continue to experience the product. And that is, for me at least, a very easy way to fall back in love with the product.
Yeah.
Right? A very simple level. This is a bunch of bricks that I use by my desk as an iPhone holder.
Yeah, that's very logical. I was thinking a lot about, just my own creative brain, trying to figure out ways that you could use it. That's very logical. I do have another question about that, but also in your corporate meetings, do you guys just for the full experience sprinkle some on the floor too for people to step on?
No, we would never do such a thing. No, but yeah, no, I listen, it is, I think, it's very much about experiencing the product, right? I was a huge fan of the product as a kid, but never touched it again after I was 14. honestly. Didn't ever touch it ever again. And didn't touch it again until I started working for them. And as you can tell from behind me, and if you went into my basement, I'm clearly back in it.
Yeah, well, it's amazing what you can do with Legos. So here's a question out of left field. When is Lego going to build life-size Legos so we can solve like the housing crisis?
Good question. I mean, there are people that have done that. There are some videos out there of people building life-size Lego things. It could be done.
Yeah, it could be. Like I was just thinking I'd love to go into Home Depot or Lowe's and see, the some kind of a like a recycled bottle material, but it's like legit licensed Lego connections and things like that with
Yeah,
home rating.
anything could be possible.
Love to get my Lego log cabin out in the woods.
Uncomfortable bed though.
It would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got to come up with the rounded corners.
Yeah.
Well, final question, James. I really appreciate your time today. Where do you really see, so in your position at Lego and with your work experience, where do you see things going next? What's happening next?
Well, I'll probably speak less so about the product and more about the digital space as a whole.
Yes, that's perfect.
Yeah, I think, for me, listen, 2020 was a crazy year. I think, before 2020, and, as we move into 2021, I think the major social platforms are up against it, is probably the best way to put it. I think, as you look at something like, the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, as you look at sort of the socio-political sort of dialogues and really the overly damaging and horrible place that as a whole social media can be in pockets, I think you're going to see the proliferation of these bigger social networks and the uprising of these smaller, newer communities, right? Whether it's Clubhouse, whether it's TikTok, I think, and TikTok has its own issues similar to, the Facebooks, the Instagrams of this world. But I think that's going to evolve, right? As, the younger generations get more purchasing power. They haven't been necessarily part or an active participant in the, the Facebooks of this world. I think you're going to look at a very different social network of networks, social networks, social network. There you go. Social network in, maybe as little as, 2-3 years than what we have now.
Yeah, I think you're right. And maybe, and hopefully, maybe hopefully what we can do is come up with more ways where we can do more together time doing things like building Legos, like you mentioned at the very beginning.
That would be lovely. Yes, we'd all agree on that. I think that would be a great intention.
That'd be awesome. So, James, thank you again for joining us on the Law of Relevancy podcast. Where can we follow your thought leadership?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. Yes, feel free to follow along. I am at JLW Greg across Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
All right. Well, everybody, make sure you do that. And hopefully we'll have you back soon, James. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.